Hello and welcome to Discovering True Health, your weekly deep dive into health and wellness. Thank you so much for joining us today. Before we get started with today's show, please hit that subscribe button below. It helps us out a lot, and you'll stay up to date on all our upcoming shows. You can also check out additional information on our website, Instagram, and Facebook. All those links are below. So today on Discovering True Health, we'll be discussing the corruption and issues within the system of women's healthcare, including the fertility industry. And we'll be talking about how to navigate through both using a framework my guest has created to equip women to advocate for themselves and be heard. So my guest today is Amanda Laden. She is founder and CEO of Period to Pause, the leading platform for elevating women's voices when advocating for their own health, healthcare treatment, and well-being. And she's paving the way to give women their voice back and empowering them to stand up for themselves and their health. So thank you so much for joining me today, Amanda.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here to share my story and hopefully to help women to use their voices to advocate for change and themselves.
Yes, I'm really looking forward to learning about everything that you've learned so far. So let's start with your journey, and your journey and experience in women's healthcare ultimately is what led you to create your company, Period to Pause. Can you share with us your journey, what you learned, as well as the unfortunate costs that you incurred because of the issues you experienced?
Well, I don't even know where to begin on this. I mean, my journey ultimately started when I was really 16 years old and getting my periods and really having bad periods and kind of being given a tool, which is the birth control pill, to mask the periods I was having and not knowing that what I was experiencing isn't normal. So you fast forward into my adult life, and my husband and I decided to try to have children. And we were really having a hard time in our fertility journey. And so we opted to have IVF. We went through several rounds of IVF. I think it was 8 in total, which for anybody who has gone on that journey knows that 1 is tough enough, but when you get to 8, it's like you're moving into insanity. And ultimately, I had miscarriages a couple of times and had one instance where during the miscarriage, I had to go back in for an emergency procedure because they found a blood clot at the top of my uterus. And my uterus was far too big for how far along I was. And my doctor finally put 2 and 2 together. She said, wait a second, you complain about bad periods, you have excessive bleeding, bleeding to the point of just embarrassment and being debilitating. You've had these miscarriages, you had a blood clot. Oh my gosh, I think you have something called adenomyosis. So it was at that point that I got diagnosed. And by the time I did get diagnosed, it was far too late. My adenomyosis was diffused. And the only solution, the only cure, and I use that because it's kind of a joke because there isn't a cure, is to remove your uterus. And so it culminated in me having having a hysterectomy and spending, thousands upon thousands of dollars through IVF and then going through the hysterectomy.
Wow, that's a harrowing journey. For those, I've heard of endometriosis.
Mm-hmm.
Can you explain what you were diagnosed with and kind of what
Sure.
that is for those? Because I've never heard of it myself.
Yeah, and that's so common. I share with folks that I have adeno or adenomyosis. And, there's a lot of doctors that don't even know what it is. They don't know what signs to look for. More and more common, we see PCOS or we see endometriosis. The way it's been described to me is that adenomyosis is a cousin of endometriosis. So they present slightly differently. So what happens with adeno is that you have endometrium, which grows in the muscle walls, the lining of your uterus. It's extremely painful. It can make your uterus enlarged. It's also an inflammatory disease. And then every time you have a period, you go through, most of us who have adeno go through extremely painful periods to the point of debilitation. Now, I'm not a doctor, so I'm sure there's a more technical way to describe that. However, that's kind of the simplest terms that I can describe it in. Much like endo, it can grow, it can take over some of your organs if left untreated, and it can be extremely dangerous. In my case, by the time I got to the point of having a hysterectomy, I was an emergent case, meaning my uterus was so big that my surgeon was concerned that it could burst, which could lend itself to a lot of other problems. Now, I'm just going to go back and say it does not get diagnosed as often as it should have. There's not enough research on women's diseases in general for them to really understand. When I say them, I say, OBGYNs, other medical doctors, to understand what to look for and what to ask for when it comes to the testing.
Right. And we did a show a couple months back on endometriosis, and it was the same kind of, dialogue where talking about how these doctors aren't well versed, and a lot of them don't specialize, or they don't know how to remove it properly. In the women's healthcare that are supposed to be specialists in women's healthcare. So it's very concerning. What would you say some of the early symptoms you experienced are that women should look out for as far as the early?
Yeah. I mean, anytime you're having a really bad period. Now, I'm going to caveat this by saying I just thought my periods were normal. I thought vomiting every month, being bent over in the fetal position every month, having to plan my work life, my personal life around my period was something that all women do. I didn't know until I started talking to other women, like, no, that's not how we get our periods. No, we don't bleed every single day for an entire month. We don't bleed through our clothes. I just thought these were things that other women were experiencing. And so I would say the first inkling you get that, I'm vomiting, or I'm in extreme pain, like pain where I can't even walk from, my bedroom to the bathroom, things like that, you really need to go talk to a doctor. I happen to be lucky that by the time I got diagnosed, I was in a city where there was an adenomyosis specialist. So he was able to talk me through what the disease was. He's a world-renowned surgeon, but there just aren't enough adeno focused doctors in the world. Now that a lot of doctors are studying endo, they're starting to understand the symptoms of adeno as well. But if you are a woman who is experiencing debilitating pain, a lot of excessive bleeding, vomiting, you really need to go talk to your doctor. Oh, and I will caveat that by saying, and if the doctor says, no, you just have bad periods, because that's what I got for many, many years, choose a different doctor and keep going until you get the answers you need.
Right. And I really appreciate you being open and having this conversation about your experience, because I feel like that's one of the issues as women. We don't really talk about this. Like, we don't talk about menopause until we don't know anything about it till we're going through it. We don't talk about our periods. We don't really, share with each other. So, and I think the scary part is what's coming out more and more. And what I'm hearing more and more is there's the healthcare system side is not where it should be when it comes to health.
Yes. And I want to sound the siren call for women that, if you can get this looked at and treated earlier, in my case, by the time they treated it or diagnosed it, and by the time I had gone through all of the IVF treatments I had, IVF is like watering weeds to adenomyosis and endometriosis. So that just meant that every round we went through, and being undiagnosed through all of those rounds, I was making it worse and worse, and me sicker and sicker and sicker. So I can't stress enough that if you're experiencing something like this, you definitely need to go talk to a doctor and get it early, particularly if you want to have children. And that's something that is in, your plan for your future and your life. And it's something that you'd like to do.
Right. And so this is something, from what I'm getting from what you're saying, is if we catch it early, we can, treat it, and we have a better chance of kind of getting rid of it and having a more of a normal life going forward and normal function going forward.
Well, I don't think you ever get rid of adeno, much like endometriosis. There are some things they can do to try to remove some of it so that your uterus will welcome embryos and carry a baby to full term. Unfortunately, for people with adenomyosis, you will have it for your entire life. Mm. They just don't have enough right now to actually, there's no cure. They don't know enough about it, and they're not correlating it to things that happen in women's lives. They're not correlating it to your diet. Maybe there could be genetics involved. They just don't know, and so there are some stopgaps they could put in. But right now, the only cure for it is to remove your uterus.
Wow. Yeah, and I think that's an important point that you brought up about these lifestyle, diet, et cetera, because from what we've all learned, those affect everything and are a very big deal when it comes to our health. And you speak about, in your work, you speak about how there's this kind of conveyor belt mentality in women's healthcare. You talk about speed, profit, and obedience, as well as how there's this kind of systematic silencing of women in their own healthcare. Can you speak in more detail and shed some light on these issues so we can all get a better understanding of what they are and what to look out for?
Yeah. So I think, the silencing starts from a very young age, right? We're taught still in our society, unfortunately. I think the younger generations are changing a little bit more than, say, my generation. But we're taught not to ask questions. We're taught to believe our authorities, to listen to what they say, and to just sit there and be quiet, and that we shouldn't know better. I mean, it's our bodies. We live in it. We inhabit it our entire lives, but we really need to defer to the medical professionals. We are dismissed. I mean, there are statistics out there. Unfortunately, disproportionately, women of color are dismissed more than educated white women. And, we're really taught that we shouldn't ask the questions that are important to our health. So I would say, first and foremost, we don't need permission from our doctors to ask the questions that are important to us. Keep asking and pushing until you get the answers that you want. And then the other thing about this is that, IVF is a money-making machine. It's not highly regulated. There isn't a governing body that forces IVF clinics to submit to certain tests every year. And, when you go into this process, the end goal for these clinics is for you to make a baby. So that is the end goal. They're looking at the statistics for themselves about how successful, in quotes, they are. They're not looking at the holistic piece of the human being and the woman who is coming in to their clinic. And so it's like this treadmill you're on. You're literally going from one appointment to the next. You're going from one test to the next. Now, mind you, in all of this, almost every single one of those tests and things you do are also money-making machines for them. So, we're in this place with our cultural programming to not ask these questions, to also think that our worth is only tied to whether or not we can give birth. And then we're in this cycle of this treadmill that doesn't allow us to stop and really say, is this the right decision for me? And, should I be seeking some other type of more holistic care? So yeah, there's so much, I think, to pick apart here. But that's kind of in a nutshell what we're dealing with.
Right. And it's so important to understand these things and really understand our own health issues and what possibilities can be happening, and your own homework, and understand diet and gut microbiome and DNA and epigenetics and how all these things can affect us. And like you said, ask the questions. And if we don't get the right answers, find another doctor. And this, I don't know too much about this. Is the IVF business, is this something insurance covers, or is this all out of pocket?
It really depends on the state.
Okay.
And it really depends on your insurance. It also depends on how many rounds you've gone through. So we started our IVF journey in Maryland. Okay. And there were certain limits there. We then moved to Massachusetts, and then there were certain limits there. But there are things that are out of pocket. So for example, should you choose to genetically test your embryos before they become implanted, you're looking at a sliding scale depending upon how many embryos you have. So as a baseline, at least in our circumstance, if you had, I think it was 3 to 5 embryos, you're looking at $5,000 every time you're testing those embryos. So, you think about that and how many times we shelled out $5,000. You also get to a point where there's a max limited value or max number on which they'll cover treatments. And so then you start paying out of pocket for all of that. Then you also have egg freezing. So if you're freezing your eggs or you're freezing your embryos, you're paying the facility to keep your eggs or your embryos. You then have other tests. For example, if you want to test you and your spouse, be that, a heterosexual partner or a partner of the same sex, there are genetic tests that they will recommend that you do based on your genealogy and where you come from. So as much as certain things might be covered, there are also things which aren't covered that are choices of that couple. So it does take a huge financial toll on people, ourselves included, even though we had pretty decent healthcare and insurance.
Interesting. Yeah, this baby making business is very lucrative. And I think what's interesting is, like you had mentioned before, instead of going to the root cause, like getting to this point and figuring out the root cause, we're paying out of pocket and paying a whole ton of money to, after the fact, come in and try to do all this.
Right. So that's a huge thing, which is, imagine if you actually went into a doctor's office and they, rather than looking at one body part or two body parts, and in this case, they're often looking at, when you first go in to see an IVF doctor, they're looking at the number of egg reserves you have. And in my case, I'm married to a man. And so they're looking at the number of sperm he has. Not looking at egg quality, not looking at sperm quality, not looking at whole health, not looking at, have you had any other diseases in your life or anything else that might contribute to this? What's your lifestyle all about? They're not taking the whole human being, the whole female, the whole male into consideration. And so, if we took more of an approach in our society of more of preventative care or looking at fertility health way before we even considering having a child, that could really mitigate some of the things that women and men go through, or non-binary people who are trying to get pregnant go through. However, we're not doing that. And I think there's a very good reason for that, which is if we started to do that, you look down the line and you can follow the money. Who would be making money? And it's a sad state of affairs where, we're really profiting off of the female body in this instance, and they really are. And you look at other countries, foreign countries, where IVF sometimes isn't allowed. Like somewhere like Norway, I think it's Norway. It's one of the Nordic countries, either Norway or Finland. They don't have IVF. Now we can argue that one way or the other, but you see foreigners sometimes coming into our medical system and shelling out a lot of money to be able to follow their hopes and dreams of being able to have a child. So it is a real money-making machine.
Right. Absolutely. It's this conveyor belt of kind of pushing you along from the beginning. Like you said, where are the doctors that are, and the, medical organizations that are doing this stuff to make sure you're not going to get to that point. No, nobody wants to do that because somebody's going to lose money further down the line.
Right. And I do think there are a lot of doctors that are in this that really have altruistic ideas of really wanting to see and help families succeed. There are some nonprofit hospitals. There are, great, other doctors who are in this that just are like, I really want to be able to see and support people to have families. The issue becomes when you're in some of these nationwide clinics or these clinics that are now being, frankly, bought out by some of these, why did I just forget the name? The investment firms that are buying out. There's a lot of investment.
They're absorbing everything. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. There's a lot of those investment companies that are going in and buying out some of these companies. I mean, this is, I think, globally a $15 billion industry, 15 billion with a B. And so, people are looking at this and going, oh, okay, there's a lot of money to be had in every single part of this cycle and this process. And, these private equity companies that are investing in the field are making a lot of cash off of sometimes, the desperate hopes of a family.
Right. And that brings us to, costs involved, the financial costs involved. What would you say all the costs involved related to these issues happening in women's healthcare are, both on a macro and a micro level?
I think I want to start kind of micro first. It's hard for me to know at a macro level what this is really costing. I think we can think about this from a health and well-being perspective, and what it means when women are going through these constant cycles of really beating up their bodies and injecting themselves with all of these hormones that I don't think we know yet the impact that all of that has on each of us who have gone through that. But I would say, if you think about even, if I have an employer and I'm taking every morning off because I have to go get my blood drawn, because I have to get my hormone levels checked, because I don't know when my eggs are going to be ready enough to go through the retrieval process. There's a cost there for women in the workplace. Because it's not something that we're openly talking about. And, I'm not going to my employer and saying, hey, by the way, I'm going to be out this amount of time because I'm trying to get pregnant. Ding and ding, forget it. Like that puts you in a setback for your career growth and trajectory. And, perhaps not allowing you as a woman to be able to progress in the way you want to progress, if that's your desire. I think about it on a micro level, which is, what are we doing to ourselves, our family units, our marriages, our spouses? I mean, I can't even estimate the costs of that. What I can think about is just the impact it has on a woman's health and well-being, on depression levels, on feeling included in society, because, in my case, we weren't able to have children in the end. And so, I've been kind of pushed out of mommy groups, I like to call it, groups where I no longer was included or invited. I definitely suffered some depression going through this because of all of the hormones. It took a toll on my marriage. It took a toll on our finances. I mean, even the non kind of economic dollars of this has a huge toll on people.
Right. And thank you for sharing that personal experience. And I'm sorry you had to go through that. I can relate to not being part of the mommy groups. That's the thing. Definitely.
And sometimes it's okay to not be part of the mommy group, like
right.
I can drink champagne on a Monday afternoon and I don't have to worry about going home to a child.
Absolutely. But I'd love to really see more data in this, because this is really sparking my interest about, root causes and how long when did this fertility issue and endometriosis and these eosinophils for women start? Is it something that has recently, kind of exploded? Is there a particular something in our food and what's in the water kind of deal going on?
Well, yeah.
Years ago, was this an issue?
I think it's interesting because I think some of these issues have probably been around as long as women have been around. I don't know that for a fact. But, because we've been dismissed for so long and people don't take our illnesses seriously, and we're called hysterical, even the root cause or the root of the word hysteria actually in Greek mean it's tied to uterus. So uterus and hysteria kind of have the same meaning. We've been called hysterical women our entire lives. It's interesting to note that finally there's been studies of women going, hey, by the time I've had a hysterectomy, and then they slice it open and look and they're like, something interesting is going on in here that we haven't seen before. I think that's probably where this started, is that they started to, post surgery, take a look at the uterus and go and start to dissect and go, oh, So all of that time when this woman was complaining about this, there is something going on. I don't know when this really came to the fore. And I think it would be interesting to tie this to our food systems,
Mhm.
to tie this to genetics as well. Like if you think about if women in your family also would complain about bad periods or had a hysterectomy, was there something in that they could start tracing or picking up sooner? I don't know. And then I also think part of this is they aren't tying, as we were talking about, the economics to all of this as well. So it's all fascinating. And I think the field of especially like looking at PCOS, endometriosis, adenomyosis, that's starting to pick up. People are looking at it. Acupuncturists have been thinking about this for a long time when they look at the whole system. I
Mhm.
also think now the younger generations of women talk a lot more about their bodies, about what's ailing them, about is this normal? Do you experience this? And so I think they're starting to bring the conversation to the fore with their friend sets and their peers, which is then, being forced into the mainstream and with doctors.
Right, which is a great thing. And like you mentioned, I mean, it could be this transgenerational trauma that's being passed on genetically. I mean, there's so much to it. Now we touched on this a lot on this earlier, and you've experienced and have quite a bit of information on the dark side of the fertility industry. Can you share with us a bit more information on how best to kind of navigate the fertility industry and what to look out for and how to avoid, some of the issues that you kind of came up against?
Yeah, I think really, really do your research on the clinics. Even if they're tied to, a teaching hospital or, something that's very well known, really, really do your research on who the doctors are. And then when you get in to talk to the doctors, be armed and prepared with questions.
Mhm.
Ask them what they measure. What's important to the clinic? Are they just looking at statistics? And is that what drives them? Are they looking at the whole human being? What is their process? What are their procedures? Depending upon your age, and if you've already been trying for a period of time, really ask them their protocol and what they're looking at, and come really armed with questions that you're kind of forcing them to answer. And if they're not taking the time and care with you, again, they're making a lot of money out of what this is. If they're not making the time to really give you a duty of care, then it's time to move on and find another clinic that will sit down and listen to you. I will say one of the places that I found that armed me with information and questions to ask that I really would not have been considering were my acupuncturists. And they specialized in women's health and fertility. And they would give me a list of questions to say, go ask these things, find out why they're not testing this, bring me your lab results, let's look at what's going on, have we thought about this, let's put you on some herbs to help. And for me, by the time really I was going to them, it was for pain management for my adeno. And but they can help you at the very, very beginning. And just knowing that it's not one size fits all. I'll also give you another quick anecdote. When we switched from Maryland to Massachusetts, the doctors there switched the protocol of the injections and the medicines I was taking. Completely fine. They do that. They have different protocols in every clinic. However, I was complaining about one of the drugs, and one of the drugs was like giving me hives. And finally, they were like, "Ooh, you're allergic to this drug." So knowing that you don't have to accept what they're saying and that they can switch out some of the medications. So I guess in sum, do your research, go armed with a list of questions, and demand you get answers. And the other thing is, I would say bring an advocate with you. So bring somebody, whether it's your spouse, your partner, a parent, somebody else, bring them with you so that they're also listening, taking notes, and asking the questions that you're not asking.
Right. Thank you for sharing all that. I really appreciate that. And I know it will help so many women. And absolutely, the right questions are everything. Do you have somewhere on your website or when you work with women, do you kind of arm them with the questions that you have kind of come up with or figured out?
So it's a great question. We are creating guidebooks right now. So stay tuned. They're not out yet, but definitely we are creating those guidebooks for women to be able to have at their fingertips. Again, not one size fits all, but maybe there's some things that you hadn't considered, some prompts that may be helpful for you as you're talking to your medical practitioners.
Wonderful. And I think it's interesting how you bring up, because traditional Chinese medicine and Ayurveda have these things built into their medical systems, and they've been around for 3,000, 5,000 years. They've had the microbiome built in their medical system, which we've Westerns only come up with it, in 2007?
Right.
So I think it's really fascinating that you got a lot of this information from your, acupuncturist.
Oh, they were my saving grace. And, as you were just saying, these practices that they've been doing have been around for thousands of years, and they look at the holistic system. They're not taking it apart. Yeah. They're looking at how everything operates. And so your nervous system, everything else, and being able to really support that in a way that's sustainable for you and individualized for you.
Right. And when certain things, I'm sure in healthcare, going down to this tiny little microscopic level could be helpful. But when it comes to baby making, it sounds like the holistic way is the way to go.
Yeah. And I think too, as more and more women are delaying parenthood or motherhood, it's important to, if you even have an inkling that you'd like to be a mother in the traditional sense in some way, or a parent in the traditional sense in some way, then I would start asking your healthcare practitioners, whether Western or Eastern, what are the things I can do to help shore up my body, to make it easier for my body to be, and I don't even like this term, but a hospitable place to, raise or grow a child. So, starting to ask yourself, what things can I do to prep my body so that I'm in the best possible shape that I can be in order to fulfill my dream or my goal of being a parent?
Right. I love that. And it's about really taking that into your own hands in the earlier parts of your life and doing your own and mitigating before you get to that point.
Mm-hmm.
Very smart. Now, you've created a framework called Voice to help women to advocate for themselves and dealing with the women's healthcare business that will help them avoid many of these consequences that you endured. Can you share with us what Voice is?
Sure. It's really just a simple acronym, which is V to vocalize or verbalize, really what's going on and what is it that's happening with my body. O is to organize. So who do I need to see? What do I need to do? What questions do I need to be asking? I is really to initiate those conversations, the meetings with medical practitioners to find your advocates. C is working with that practitioner or your acupuncturist or whomever's in your life to commit to a plan. And then E is really to execute on that and evaluate. So really quite simple steps. And within each of those, there's subsets or questions you could be asking yourself. But it's just a way also to really bring back the power to women or give back the power to women to know that you do have a voice in your own healthcare. And these are some simple steps that you can take in order to make sure that you're leveraging your voice in the way that works for you and your needs.
Right. Thank you for sharing that. That's so powerful. And like you said, it's simple, but it's also something we don't talk about enough and don't think about enough till we're in a bad situation. So
yes,
great to have this open dialogue ahead of time and for you to be doing what you're doing with advocating and really getting this information out there. For those who want to contact you or learn more about your work, where can we find you? And do you have any other programs, information available around women's healthcare for those that want to learn more?
Sure. So you can go to periodtopause.com. Also at period to pause, which is on all of our social medias. We are launching a podcast, hoping it launches next week. We have some great information coming out. So please look out for that on Apple, Spotify, wherever you listen to your podcasts. And we will continue to really provide space to have conversations as well as provide those guidebooks or toolkits for women. And then we will have in the future some kind of membership type groups that are coming up that really help focus on getting the right information. People can go down the internet rabbit hole and, really giving you the right information and resources and tools to be able to navigate whatever journey that you're going through from period to menopause and everything in between.
Beautiful. Well, thank you for providing all that. It's so important right now. And I'll post a link to that below. And we'll also keep all your kind of updates flowing on through Discovering True Health's social media as well when you come out with these new programs and new information for people. Before we wrap up the show today, do you have any final thoughts or words for women who are currently dealing with maybe a women's health issue or fertility issues, but aren't finding the right help or answers?
I think it just goes back to we know our bodies. We really, truly do. And so don't let somebody talk you out of what you kind of, know to be true in your own system, in your own skin that you're living in. And don't back down. Just because somebody is telling you that you don't know what it is you're feeling, or that must just be normal. We oftentimes know what isn't normal in the thing that we're living in, what houses us. And so continue to use your voice to advocate for what it is you need. And also hopefully that all of you who are listening to this can be a voice for change in a system that really isn't set up to support us.
Absolutely. We all really need to join together and be part of that shift. Well, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your journey and giving us this really incredible, vital information on how to navigate through women's healthcare and fertility. And thank you as well for this really important work you're doing to help create an open dialogue and to give other women voice in their own healthcare journey.
You're welcome, Christy. It was such a pleasure to spend time with you today. Thank you so much.
Remember, knowledge is power. The more you understand about your body, the better you're able to stay healthy and prevent disease. And a reminder, I'm not your doctor, so please don't take this as medical advice. If you have specific questions about your healthcare, feel free to reach out to your practitioner. And if you like this video, please like and share it with others. This information could really help someone you may know. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button below and the little bell to be sure you don't miss out on our future shows. And I will see you all next Wednesday on the next episode of Discovering True Health.